Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, police seized and raided my property, froze my bank accounts and arrested me without charges. Here is what happened. And the first one is titled, Police Malicious Compliance. So, a long time ago, my papa was a brand new rookie member of law enforcement in a small town. There was a particular captain known for being an angry guy, the type of guy who would chuck a stapler at your head if he was angry. Let's call him Captain Hardass. So, at a shift meeting, Captain Hardass had an issue with the lack of tickets being written at a particular red light. A city council member had almost gotten into a traffic accident due to someone running a red light. He commanded, "You're gonna go down and sit on that intersection and you're gonna write tickets. I don't care who they are." So after the meeting, my papa was the first to head down to the light. He didn't want to get in trouble for not complying with the captain orders, so within 5 minutes of watching the intersection, someone runs the light and boy, did they run it good. My dad pulls the driver over and what do you know? It's the chief of police's wife. So being a good cop, my papa greets her by name and writes her a ticket. The lady is livid. She asks what will happen if she refuses to sign the ticket. His voice quivers as he says, "Well, Mrs. Police Chief, I'm gonna have to arrest you." Realizing he was serious, she angrily snatches the ticket out of his hand and hastily signs it. The next day, my dad gets called into Captain Hardass's office. Other cops had been prepping my dad for this moment. But instead of yelling, the captain warily asks, "Don't you think you could have seen fit to have given her a break?" My dad, sweating bullets, responds, "Well, I wanted to, Captain, but you said..." And Captain Hardass slumped down in his seat, defeated. Later on, my mama was working at a fundraiser with the chief's wife. The chief's wife did not realize my mom was the wife of officer that wrote her the ticket, so she complains to my mom about the ticket and the conversation she had had with her husband after. It went something like this. Police chief, "Did you do it?" Wife, "Yes." Police chief, "Well then quit complaining." And because the town was so small, her ticket was reported in the local newspaper. My dad never heard a word about it from the chief. And yeah, Ripe stars, if your boss instructs you to follow the rules, then you better do it, I guess. Sometimes malicious compliance is just too satisfying. And the next one is titled, Neighbors Dared Me to Call the Police. I have terrible neighbors. They like to get drunk and fight. They will fight anyone, each other, or even come after my children or myself. Well, last night was no exception. They were getting rowdy and hollering. I am so sick of it. They were throwing stuff onto the road, playing in traffic, screaming, making a scene. I'm not feeling great, so I was in bed with the window open. I turned on my lamp, got up to the window to close it, and then they saw me. Of course, that started a new round of yelling obscenities at me. I just shook my head, the window is quite big and heavy, and like I said, I'm not feeling so great, so it was taking some time to close. She yelled something along the lines of, "You enjoyed the show? Why don't you record this? Your security camera is not working, huh? Why don't you call the cops if you really want to see a show?" I had no intention of involving myself, I just wanted to not hear them. But then I remembered my internet was down and my security cameras were not working at the moment, so I propped up a spare phone on my window and started recording while I called the police per their request. I gave the cops a play-by-play, which they could clearly hear in the background their names and the address. Within a few short minutes, there were several police cars surrounding their place and mine. The woman ran inside to hide, the man ran to his van to drive off, and the two children were roaming my front yard in just their underwear. I knew they have small kids but had assumed that they were in bed or something because I had not seen or heard them. Did I mention it was 9:30 to 10 PM and raining? The police took them all away, the kids were loaded up as well. This is not the first time, but really hoping it was the last time, at least for the kids' sake. And yeah, Ripe stars, if you're a complete idiot, never dare your neighbor to call the cops on you when you do something wrong. Your neighbor might just maliciously comply and you will end up in big trouble. Anyway, the title story is titled, Police Seized My Property, Froze My Bank Account, Arrested Me Without Charges. So I live in South Dakota and this all happened to me about a year ago. There's a lot to unpack with what happened, so I'll do my best to be as brief as possible. One day, police raided my house and when I tried to ask them what was going on, I was put in handcuffs and could only watch as they went through my house. They took a ton of my personal property as evidence but refused to tell me what it was evidence for. They had a warrant, so I couldn't stop them even if I wasn't cuffed and put into a police car. It was only later that I found out how much of my things they really took, including my computer, my phone, cash, and other valuable items. I knew enough to ask them in the moment what I was being arrested for, but they told me that I was not being arrested, I was just being detained. I looked up a lot of this information later, but it turns out they can detain a person for 72 hours without actually charging them with anything. Without a charge, I could not get a lawyer or a bail hearing to get myself out. I was just stuck waiting to see if I was gonna get arrested with something, and when I wasn't and released, things did not get better. I assumed I would get my stuff back, but it was still being held for evidence. They call it civil asset forfeiture, which means if they think it was related to a crime, they can hold onto it for basically an indefinite amount of time. What they also did was freeze my bank accounts, claiming that the money could be related to a crime. This was a huge problem because it meant that none of my bills could get paid since all of my money was in the bank. Aside from a couple $1,000s I had in cash which got taken away during the police raid. I could not get any information, but talking to a lawyer let me realize that one of the things that this is common with is drug investigations. Which at that point was starting to make a little more sense to me, but still did not seem right. Here in South Dakota, weed is legal for recreational use. It is legal to use it for medical purposes, and I do have a medical MJ card. I don't want to go into details of my condition and why I have the card, but I have severe chronic pain. Part of the program lets me grow a few plants for my own medical use. I don't know if it is because this is a rural area and driving to a dispensary was just deemed too much of a hassle or what. The point is that I was legally growing 2 plants for my own use, and well, it turns out that a lot of people in my state with medical cards that grew were growing more than they should in order to get weed over the border into states where it is flat out illegal. Or within the state to people who did not have medical cards. Safe to say, my plants were also confiscated by the police. I wanted to fight what they did, but it was hard to fight when there were no charges actually placed against me. They had just been raiding homes in the area and thinking everything with value was bought with drug money. Despite no evidence showing I did that or me going outside of my boundaries with what I was allowed to grow. Not to mention they held me for 3 days and did not even charge me of a crime. They did nothing illegal, but I felt like I'd been violated and needed to do something. I even had my gas shut off when the bill couldn't get paid. The bank accounts did get unfrozen once all the funds in them were confirmed to be legitimate, so I was at the very least still able to pay my bills. But they had a ton of my things that I wanted back because I had done nothing wrong. As for the property, I had a few options. I could basically turn myself in, meaning let myself get arrested so I could fight the thing in court to get my stuff back, or I could pay a fine and my things would be released to me. Neither option seemed to make sense because I didn't want a record as I'd never been in trouble before, going through interrogations and being held again in the cell. But I also did not want to pay a fine because it felt like that I was admitting to something I did not even do. I wanted to file a lawsuit against the state for allowing a search warrant to be given with no evidence. Basically, I wanted to sue them for being allowed to take my things to begin with, claiming they did not have enough proof to show that I was a threat. I got a lawyer to pick up the case, and since I was not the only person they did this to, they felt like I had a good chance. It would force them to openly say what they used to get the warrant, and I would just have to prove that it was not sufficient. Easier said than done though, because of a state government having far more resources than I do. They were claiming that they got a tip somebody in my general area was growing more weed than their card allowed for and was selling it for profit. That was the only thing they had that caused them to burst into my house, just knowing I had a card and was growing for my personal use. I would have guessed the argument to be made was that they didn't find anything showing me guilty, so I should be given everything back. Instead though, my lawyer had to use past cases to show that the tip and knowing I had a medical card was not enough evidence to suspect me of a crime. And even without arresting me, did not support them seizing my property and freezing my bank accounts. Also, it was brought up my chronic pain condition would have been known to the arresting officers, and yet I was handled harshly without any arrest being made, causing my extreme discomfort and pain due to how they treated me. Which was also true because I was being kind of thrown around despite not resisting or anything. And clearly they knew about my condition since they knew why I had the medical card. There was no way my case was going to force them to get rid of the rules or things regarding raiding homes and seizing assets. But what it did do was make them give me back my things without me needing to pay a fine for it, hopefully making it easier for other innocent people to get their seized things back. My lawyer told me way after the fact that these kinds of seizures, especially when drug related, bring in big profit to law enforcement. I mean, at the end of the day, it's basically extortion because people will want to pay a fine if it means not having any kind of record or risk of going to jail. Part of it makes me want to move to a state where MJ is just flat out legal, so I don't need to be scared about it happening again. And now let's move on to an Am I the A-hole story. It is titled, Am I the A-hole for threatening to call the police on my coworker's mom? So I have a coworker who works in a different city. We have a professional, friendly relationship. Some years ago, we shared some beers together, but we are not what I would call friends. Unfortunately, my coworker has been struggling with some very serious health issues. My coworker is also married and has a son who's in his teenage years. His son is probably between the ages of 14 to 17, I'm not entirely sure. My coworker was born and raised in the city I work in. Anyway, my coworker's mom came into my office, she introduced herself and I was sympathetic with her. I'm a father and there's a very good chance she will have to bury her son, and that's really tragic. I'm also confused, why is my coworker's mom talking to me? Then she asks me, is her son in the hospital or at home? I honestly don't know, and I tell her that. She then asks me if he is dead or not. I told her, as far as I know, her son is still alive. We have a lot of back and forth and it's pretty constant. She's asking me for information and I'm saying I don't know. But then it starts to dawn on me. She keeps telling me his wife or grandson and my coworker are ignoring her calls. Well, obviously, I don't understand the dynamics of her relationship with her son, but I'm suspecting there's a reason she doesn't know. Then she asks me to call his manager and find out what's going on, but I feel that would be inappropriate to do. Now, this entire ordeal with my coworker's mom is approaching 45 minutes and I tell her she needs to leave my office. I tell her that I've told her what I know, it's not my place to be involved and she needs to leave now. We have more back and forth. We are now approaching an hour of this back and forth. She was with a friend and family member and I tell his mom, "Ma'am, you need to leave my office or I'm gonna be forced to call the police and have you removed." I really didn't want to have to say that, but I didn't have much of a choice. For your information, I didn't need to call the police, which I'm glad I didn't have to do that. She was offended at my threat and I set a timer and I told her she needed to leave my office by 3 minutes or I was gonna call the cops on her. I had work to do, she was in my way, and I also suspect she was trying to use me to get information that my coworker, for whatever reason, has decided she doesn't need to know. The person she was with got her to leave and I didn't need to call the cops. For your interest, I called his manager on this and apparently his manager, at the request of my coworker, blocked the mother's number, which is why she was not able to get through to his manager. His manager did thank me for not putting him on the spot and said that he's aware of what's going on with my coworker, but we are not at liberty to disclose that to his mom, nor do we as an organization feel that's appropriate. So, was I an a-hole for how I treated his mom? My wife thinks so. Update, long story short, my coworker is dying, he has since passed away, and his mom was trying to use me to get in touch with him. I refused and stonewalled her. A week ago he passed away. Yesterday my coworker's wife came by to see me and to thank me. Apparently, my coworker's mom was toxic and abusive and she did allow and covered up some truly horrible things that happened to my coworker as he was growing up and my coworker wanted nothing to do with his mom. Apparently my coworker's wife heard through the grapevine that I stonewalled his mom from getting in contact with my coworker. His wife, with her son, who is also my coworker's son, to tell me my coworker wanted to say thank you, but didn't have the strength of time and they appreciate me not putting his mom in contact with them. My coworker was able to pass away peacefully, surrounded by people of his choosing, which is how it should be. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So my cousin is a farmer in Venezuela and some crazy stuff went down with the group actually getting him imprisoned just to take his land. For a little backstory, my family all grew up in Venezuela, but my parents immigrated to America when I was about 8, which of course meant I went with them. My uncle and cousins all stayed though, and when he was describing to me what this group was doing to him and acting like, I swear that it was almost like a super corrupt HOA. I tried to see if he knew what HOA meant, but he didn't, so I know that it is not actually an HOA. And Ripestories, I think by that the author means that HOAs probably don't really exist in Venezuela, but this was pretty much an equivalent. Either way, for this story I need to call it something though, so we will go with that. These people were horrible and did anything they wanted to the farmers living in the area, with seemingly no way to be stopped. My cousin would complain about them constantly, trying to make him follow their rules despite the fact that he had never signed up as part of the group. There were probably a ton of things that he never told me about them, but he called me one day to complain. My cousin, these people are really making me angry. Me, what did they do this time? At this point, I was used to him telling me how they did things like try and extort money from him, wanting a percentage of his profit, or wanting control of how he ran the farm. My cousin, they tried telling me that they want my land and they have the right to buy it. They were offering me next to nothing and making it seem like it was a done deal. I'm not selling the farm and giving it to these a-holes. Me, they are delusional if they really think they can get away with this crap forever. He told me another story about them forcing another farmer out of his property, despite not being part of that HOA type group either. They really do anything they want, and at this point I did not know exactly how they were getting away with it. All that was about to change because of what they had done next. I did not hear from my cousin for a while and got extremely concerned. I contacted other family members and they looked into his whereabouts. When they told me that he was in jail, I started asking a million questions about what happened. It took a while of back and forth before I get the story of how he ended up imprisoned. He refused to sell his land to that HOA group and went as far as insulting them. They obviously did not like that and told him again to sell them the land because it is the rules of the HOA. He pointed out to them that he never joined that group and was not under their control. Then said some very nasty things to them that caused them to get furious with my cousin. That was when I learned the HOA was able to get away with things because they had connections. They used money to bribe people in power like city officials, police, and even judges. With all that corruption, they were able to get away with anything they wanted and not face the consequences. They simply told the police they paid off to have my cousin imprisoned by any means needed. They came to get him and claimed that he was living on stolen land, and the next thing he knew, he was in jail. He did go to court, but it didn't help with them also being paid off. With him gone, the HOA stole all 1,000 acres of his farm and started to destroy it. They were digging up the land for building while destroying his fields. They sold off all his animals and pocketed the money for themselves. Now that I knew where my cousin was and why I put everything on hold in order to help him. While he might not have a lot of money being a farmer, I make more than enough to get him a good lawyer. I went down there and along with my cousin filed a lawsuit against this HOA group for stealing his land and imprisoning him with no just cause. I even managed to get him out of prison until his trial, arguing that it was corruption that put him there in the first place. The hardest part of the entire lawsuit was trying to find somebody impartial to judge the case. We went through investigating 3 before we finally found one that the HOA did not seem to pay off to look the other way. We filed the lawsuit against them, and within, the entire thing exposed every dirty little secret the HOA had. How they managed to steal his land, and we're in the process of destroying it as we fought to get it back. Pointing out that my cousin was not part of the HOA, so he did not need to follow their rules and guidelines. We also made a point of the fact that legally, he cannot be forced to sell anybody his land if he doesn't want to. Finally, we started exposing issues with the arrest itself and how we found connections of the HOA, giving those police officers money in order to arrest my cousin for the crime he didn't actually commit. The judge was convinced and the HOA was ordered to evacuate the land and that my cousin was the true owner of the property. Also, that the HOA would need to compensate for the damage they did by giving my cousin money. Also, of course, my cousin was told that he was free and would not be returned to jail. The phony charges against him were dropped, and after 3 months of this crap, he could finally return home. He could not just pretend like it never happened though and allow the HOA to keep running and ruining people's lives. He had seen others be destroyed by them and was finally done, and he wanted to get some revenge. He had all this information from the court, so he decided to make things very public. He called out not only the HOA but every city official and police officer that he knew was on their payroll. That news spread like crazy and there was no choice but for an internal investigation. About 24 people lost their jobs for being corrupt and taking money from the HOA to let things slide. The HOA leaders also had a deep dive, looked into them and could see all the criminal activity. Now with all the people that turned their back on the HOA, they were finally be able to be brought to justice. My cousin could not stop smiling when he told me the HOA leaders were taken away and being sent to prison. It was their turn to be locked up, but the only difference was that they deserved it. He managed to use the money he won to partially fix the farm at least. I would have been more angry about it, but he came off as fine and happy despite the damage done. I think he was just happy that they were gone and he could breathe again without somebody over his shoulder harassing him. Regardless, things have calmed down for him and the farm is doing great, and the neighborhood is actually way better off now that the HOA people are in jail and cannot extort and put people in jail for no reason anymore. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripestories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.